Moving on now to our surface water panel, which will sort of be our last session of the day. The moderator for today's panel is Lindsay McPhail. Now, Lindsay is an assistant resource specialist at the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. In the Water Resource Management Group at MWD, her projects focus on agricultural water use, conservation, legislation, and open water data. Lindsay's background is in natural resource economics, where she studied at UC Davis, UC Santa Barbara, and Penn State. And I know that we may be just actually, ironically, a minute early on all of this, but Lindsay, can I turn it over to you now?
Yes, absolutely, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, even though we're a minute early, I think we can get started on the final panel of the day. Thanks, Scott, for the introduction. I really enjoyed the lightning round of the Innovator Showcase. All of the presenters did such a great job. And so I'm excited to introduce our final panel of the day, which will bring together a lot of the themes that, that have been discussed throughout the panels and showcases throughout day one. Technical water innovations, water data governance and open data, and collaborative solutions to water management. So to kick off this panel, I just wanted to start a kind of a fun poll for the audience, so if the host can make that live. Okay, so I just wanted to check in on how everyone's doing with the last panel. And so just a fun, easy poll. Hopefully you can answer in just a second. How many cups of coffee have you had today? And we'll just give it a couple seconds. Okay, a lot of people drink a lot of coffee, which is good, 3+ cups of coffee. And it sounds like there's not too many people that have answered that they don't have enough coffee, which is good. Most of us, I think, are used to spending full days on Zoom by now. And the good news is I don't think you're gonna have to fix yourself another cup of coffee, because like the previous sessions we've had today, we have a very exciting final panel. You will all get to hear from 5 individuals on how water management and open data efforts are interconnected. First, we'll hear from Lauren Patterson from Duke and the Internet of Water, then Mark Tompkins from Flow West, then Ben Kerr from Foundry Spatial, and last but not least, we'll have a joint presentation by Eric Ringelberg of the Freshwater Trust and Michael George, the Delta Water Master. And I'd like to just make a quick note to the audience. I encourage you to submit questions for the panelists by pressing that Q&A icon at the bottom on Zoom, and we'll have about 10 minutes or so at the very end, and we'll just be collecting those throughout the session. And if there's any questions we don't get to, we'll be recording them so we can follow up with answers after the session. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Lauren Patterson. Lauren is a senior policy associate at the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Solutions at Duke University and is a co-founder of the Internet of Water project. Lauren's career has focused on using data to better understand the impacts and effectiveness of policies and management efforts on water resources. She has explored floodplain management, in-stream flows, hydraulic fracturing, reservoir management, and the affordability of water services. Lauren is passionate about visualizing and communicating data in a manner that resonates with an audience and can help generate new conversations around an old issue. Despite entirely lacking a sense of direction, her words, not mine, she has a PhD in geography from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Lauren, welcome. Glad you can join us. I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Lindsay. If you could put up that first poll and go to the next slide, please. So I am presenting work that my colleague Kyle Anda at the Internet of Water has been doing in partnership with USGS and others to create GeoConnects, which is a piece of technology that is designed to help make data more findable. Next slide, please. And if you can close the poll. So this is a big lift. As we heard from our keynote speaker earlier today, California alone has over 1,000 agencies managing water, many of whom probably collect their own data. And this is not unique to California. This is true across the US. Traditionally, water has been managed in silos: groundwater, surface water, quantity, quality. And all these agencies hold different pieces of data. And they're collecting that data to meet their primary mission, which traditionally is not to share those data with others. So the Internet of Water, our mission is to create the social and technological infrastructure needed to help make data more findable, more accessible, more usable, and to really help build this network where data can flow seamlessly between organizations. And if you could put up the results from that poll. Yeah, I had no idea what I would see here. 2 to 5 sources is the most common. Our goal is with GeoConnex, we will expose new data that might be useful to you in your research. Next slide, please. So GeoConnex is about finding data. Next slide. So currently, if you want to look for the water levels in your favorite lake, you might type this into your search browser, and if USGS has a gauge, it'll come back with that gauge location, maybe the Army Corps, Bureau of Rec, or your state. But pretty quickly you start seeing boat rentals and kayaks, which are fun, but not the data that we want to show. Next slide, please. What we are hoping to do with GeoConnex is to expose data that's connected to a location that maybe you didn't know existed. So if you typed in that same search, it would return not just the lake levels, but also water quality data, harmful algal blooms, fish species. It could return lake levels for upstream locations as well as downstream. So we want to enable Google or whatever browser you use, easy, quick searches that expose a lot of data that could be beneficial for decision making or incorporating into models. Next slide, please. So to do that, GeoConnex has to do 3 things. The first is to create unique identifiers. So if you can imagine, there's thousands of agencies out there collecting data. While they might have unique identifiers within their agency, it might not be unique across all the agencies. So we want to make sure that when we're talking about a specific piece of data, we're all talking about the same data. And so this is similar to DOI for journal articles. And what we want to do is anybody can create GeoConnex. It's on GitHub. You can mint an ID. And the formula is a URL. So it's geoconnex.us / whatever agency you register under / and then whatever the unique ID is for that data. And the fact that it's a URL is important for the second thing. Next slide, please. Which is to create a persistent location for those data. So even if you're not sharing your data to the public, we want people to be able to find it and find these data over time. And so you can create a landing page that might look something like this, where it has a map with the location and then some metadata that you put in about that data. Now, if you are making your data publicly available, you can use GeoConnex to redirect people directly to the landing page for those data. And next slide, please. That's really useful. So traditionally, we might build our apps or have a website that's linking to all these other data that others are providing. And everything is going great until you get that phone call that says, hey, your app's broken, or again, all these 404s, we can't find your web page. And what happens is you'll go and you'll look and you'll say, oh, the people I was pulling the data from have changed how they structure their website. I have to go fix all those broken links now. What GeoConnex will let you do is if you create your persistent identifier in your landing page, when you build your app, you can point to the GeoConnex URL, and then that agency, if they restructure how they're serving up data or change their API, they simply have to change what GeoConnex is pointing to, so all those other links and apps dependent on those data don't break. Next slide, please. The last thing that we're hoping GeoConnex will do, and we're currently developing, is that network linked data index. So basically enabling what we saw in that use case, where you typed in the search and import all these other data. So water is located in space, which is really useful. We have certain administrative units that we manage water in, so counties, districts, states, and then there's hydrologic units that are very important to water, which is connected. Your watersheds, your river basins, your aquifers. Next slide, please. So if I have a gauge in a watershed, I want to know all the other gauges that are within that watershed. Next slide, please. And if you think of these as overlapping containers, so if I have a location in a HUC 12, which is a really tiny watershed, I know that HUC 12 is inside of HUC 10, which is inside of HUC 8, that overlaps 2 aquifers that covers these 10 counties in these 3 states. And you can start to build a spatial fabric of how things are connected to each other or flow upstream and downstream. Next slide, please. So for example, with EPA, we're testing this out. So you see this script on the left-hand side, which is just a short script that you would put into the HTML of your landing page. So if you're a in EPA's How's My Waterway, they have public service area boundaries. And you see that green circle, that's the GeoConnex ID that EPA has signed for this particular service area. And you can see that that is about this red circled area, this Hub 12, and that's the persistent ID for that Hub 12. And this little script that you would just put in the landing page of your HTML is really the key to the future of GeoConnex. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So currently where we are is we are populating GeoConnex with these administrative boundaries, these hydrologic boundaries, lakes, bridge locations, things that don't really move. Next slide, please. And what we're hoping, and this is the social fabric part, is that as agencies start using GeoConnex and creating these unique IDs, they'll start saying our data are about these locations. Next slide, please. And they'll have that HTML on that landing page, and then we'll build a web crawler that goes and it looks for all those GeoConnex IDs and it harvests those links. Next slide, please. To create a water data knowledge graph. So this would be what enables us to do that thing earlier where you type in that search for data at a location and it will pull all the relevant data upstream, downstream. You can start doing these smart geospatial location searches. Next slide, please. And again, the Internet of Water is about building some of this technology to enable finding data, but it's very much a social community exercise as well. So the data will only be as findable as much as people are using GeoConnex and embedding those links. Next slide, please. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us, and here's some information about GeoConnex. Give it a whirl, check it out, and thank you.
Wow, so thank you very much, Lauren. That was a really great overview for how to produce and control different types of water data on a really wide scale. And keeping in mind these principles that Lauren just presented on with regards to open data, our next presenter is going to be talking about a specific case study that involves managing Shasta Dam operations to ensure sufficient flows for a salmon run. So I'd like to introduce Mark Tompkins. Mark is the founder and managing partner of FlowWest, a water resources and ecosystem management consulting firm based in Oakland, California. He's a fluvial geomorphologist and civil engineer who has worked primarily on river restoration and management in the Western United States for the past 20 years. Mark started building an open water data consulting practice 10 years ago and has been deeply engaged in both technical and policy efforts to advance the implementation of open data in California water management. Today, FlowWest has a growing team of data technologists and water resources domain experts, helping a diverse array of client organizations to improve their decision-making and management through the better use of data. Mark, thank you. I'll let you get started.
Thanks, Lindsay. I just want to make sure my mic is on and you can hear me.
We can hear you, thanks.
Great, okay. And Lauren, great talk. That was a really nice lead-in, and a lot of what Lauren just described are things that in my firm we're really excited about happening, and the kinds of resources that we'll ultimately have access to through that kind of work. So you can go to the next slide here. I am talking about the Sacramento River, and in particular a demonstration project we did a little over a year ago on the management of Shasta Dam, one of the biggest dams in the state, for the benefit of winter run Chinook salmon, which is a very sensitive and endangered species of salmon in the Central Valley. And just to give you a little context first, this was a demonstration project related to basically the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's management of Shasta Dam. And we had a simple hypothesis, was that more open data in the process, plus better analytical and visualization tools, would lead to improved decision-making regarding the operations of that dam for this important species. So next slide. It was a big team effort. I want to acknowledge that before I get too deep in here. And so actually in the pictures, you see kind of the typical team that my firm FlowWest puts together for these kinds of projects. In the upper left and the lower right, you've got water resource domain experts like myself that are knowledgeable and have done a lot of work in the systems on the ground. And then in the lower left and upper right, you've got the technology team, and they're also have some background in natural resources and environmental sciences, but their primary focus and expertise is in data management and development. And so, of course, this was also engaged a lot of other stakeholders, including the Bureau of Reclamation, the Sacramento River Settlement Contractors, the major state agencies and federal agencies, and Stanford University, actually one of the earlier talks today, the new head of the consortium, the Open Water Data Consortium, Tara, was very involved tracking the success of this demonstration project. So it was really a great learning experience as well as a useful project. Next slide. And I'm going to just do, by way of a little bit of additional background, talk about what got us to this project. Number one, what you've heard a lot about, I'm sure, the Assembly Bill 1755 and the Open Water Data Act, that the mindset around data-driven water management is changing rapidly. It's feeling a lot more like there's a significant hammer than there was 5 years ago when we were trying to get things going in this area in our consulting practice. Next slide. And we always ask the question, as really the domain experts, we started feeling like we were accepting, kind of 1980s era computing and analytical and visualization solutions in, the year 2020. And so that's also underlying the hypothesis here. What if we expected more in the way we're managing these systems and really allowed the experts more time to be the experts and less time to try and figure out where the data lives. Next slide. So it took some learning, and this project was no exception. There's a lot of sort of cobbled together tools and data sets out there that you've got to start with. And that really is, at least for this intersection of water resources and aquatic ecosystem data management, really is still a big part of the problem, that there's just lots of diversity to the information and the places and ways that it's stored. Next slide. We also discovered through this demonstration project that it's really not, what people had been calling like a big data project in terms of volume. It's really pretty little data volume-wise when you're managing a reservoir, even with all these complicated criteria and other issues. But it's little data with a lot of different and challenging big problems that have compounded over many years. Next slide. So we came into this process, it was largely a, spreadsheet driven management and PDF sort of distribution for briefings and meeting materials. We transitioned that into a much more well-documented, transparent, and repeatable analysis approach that used a whole range of different tool sets that you can see here. And next slide. And just very quickly, I don't have time in this presentation to go into the tool itself. You can Google Shasta reservoir operations and check it out on your own. But essentially, it tracks the three major things: flows, temperatures, and fish presence and location and condition, and compares them in real time against the criteria that are required to meet compliance with biological opinion. So it gives a new way and a real-time way and an interactive way to manage Shasta operations. And next slide, this is just, I'm going to close with sort of the problems and lessons learned here. We entered the demonstration project and really found that it was hampered by paper-based static reporting, no real interactivity with the data, kind of delayed access to the data, multiple sources, so you couldn't really get access to it all in one place, took a lot of work. And maybe the most important one is Reclamation themselves were really overwhelmed by requests for information that they just didn't have a good way to fulfill. So next slide. The achievements we felt like this demonstration project provided were basically integrating all this information in one place. Developing data standards is probably one of the biggest ones. And then demonstrating a consulting and expert-driven workflow to build tools, and then connecting to other tools that were already either in development or being used in this process. Next slide. Let's see here. I think that's just to give you a quick screenshot of the landing page in case you go look for it. And then next slide are sort of lessons learned. One of the biggest lessons learned for me was, I think that the actual sort of the ancillary products from a demonstration project or a project like this that get developed are really hugely valuable. We developed a little piece of software called CDEC Retrieve that's now been used in thousands of different applications of people trying to use the Department of Water Resources flow data. And so just that one piece of this effort was really valuable. It made the reporting more accessible. It helped us deal with multiple year comparisons and really is a way to streamline reporting. And then probably by far the most important one, though, is that you really need to get full buy-in from the decision makers in this kind of effort before embarking at all on the project. That's key. Otherwise, it's really hard to get adoption after you've initiated the process. And maybe the final thoughts here. Next slide. Sorry. It's really as much a people problem and bringing the right people into this water resources, aquatic ecosystem sector, people with the data management skills that haven't really been the focus of our sector. Next slide. And last, so I think drawing on that sort of the people part of it, we should be focusing on those users and decision making. We should be attracting and investing heavily to attract new talent any way we can. And then really empowering data shares. And I'm super encouraged by this event and others like it that are really starting to do that. I think this is picking up steam in a great way. And adopt new business models, just related, I think, to the last session's discussion of transaction costs. That has been a huge barrier. I see it coming down a little bit, but it is still something pretty significant in trying to get multiple agencies to go down this path. And then last, APIs are critically important and I think, to Lauren's point about bringing data together and available, that'll really drive a lot more of this kind of demonstration work. So thank you. I think that's my final slide, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. That was great. And as a data analyst, I was impressed and excited to see your tool set suite that you use in your work in terms of developing the transparent and repeatable analyses. And so this takes us to our third presenter, Ben Kerr, who will be presenting on a decision support framework for conjunctive management of surface and groundwater resources. So Ben leads a team of scientists and software developers at Foundry Spatial, a company he founded in 2010 to help connect people with science, data, and technology for sustainable decision-making. Software applications currently operated by Foundry Spatial provide more than $50 million of value each year, hard savings of time and money in addition to the unquantifiable benefits to the environment. He believes that open and transparent access to easily understandable information about water supply and demand can help people become more informed participants in values-based discussions around water management. Ben, thanks for joining us today. The floor or the screen is yours.
Super. Thank you, Lindsay, and glad to be able to join you all. I guess none of us are in the same place today. I'm coming to you from up in Canada, though, so it's pouring rain out here. I'm hiding in my truck. I was hoping to be sitting at a picnic table or something, but yeah. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the California Water Framework, which is a software platform that we are close to releasing in California to help people make decisions about water management. So primarily the use case of managing water rights. Next slide, please. So the challenge in California really comes down to a lack of accessible information. And that's can be thought of as challenges with actually accessing data, but also more substantially accessing knowledge. It's all well and good if you're trying to make a decision about a location where there is some existing monitoring data to support your decision, but the majority of the time people are faced with making decisions about locations where there are no measurements. So access to data is one problem, but then the process of generating insight for locations where data doesn't exist is a whole nother issue. And that's really at the heart, I think, of some of the challenges related to SGMA in terms of putting tangible information for people to have discussions about pros and cons of different water management questions. So what the California Water Framework does, it brings science-based insight to support water management. So it's driven by open data, by peer-reviewed science, and the science and the data come together to provide insight for people. It does that by delivering some innovative accounting of groundwater impacts on surface water flows, and by increasing the resilience of water management decisions by having a more fulsome appreciation of the variability of hydrologic systems, and the levels of demand for existing water rights, as well as the needs of the ecosystems. Next slide, please. So the California Water Framework brings together open data and open science to provide insight on demand. On the open data side, the types of data that's available in there are the Nature Conservancy's estimate of natural flows for all streams in the state of California, water rights information from ERIMS, information on ecosystem use of water from OpenET, supported by the hydrologic backbone of the NHD data set, incorporating information on water usage reporting, and then hopefully much more in the future through ABC 1755, and as you know, more and more access to data gets opened up. On the open science side, we maintain an active research and development program with world-class researchers in Canada and the US, in NGOs and private industry. It's an important commitment of ours to ensure that there is full transparency in the methods that end up being applied in the California Water Framework. So it's an important priority for us to ensure that all the research that gets incorporated is published in open access journals. And the California Water Framework brings us all together to really provide rapid access to scientifically defensible information on water sustainability. And now, alongside with this priority on robust, open, reliable data and transparent peer-reviewed methods on the science, there's a really strong focus on the usability of the tools. And that's really rooted in a core belief that you know, the tools that we use in our technical work shouldn't be terrible. We shouldn't hate using those. It should be as easy and simple to use as the products that we're used to in our personal lives. So I used to say, you know, Airbnb or booking a flight, you know, those are less relevant these days, but it's that same sort of focus on usability. Really, you know, we're not trying to maximize profit through getting people through a transactional based funnel, but the profit to be gained here is really on the sustainability and the resilience of the decisions that people are making. Next slide, please. So within the framework, there's three main components. So the first one, the water budgets, provides at any location information on the supply, demand, and ecosystem needs at that location. Modules provide tools to explore water rights, either in a watershed-based context or in a user-defined area. There's estimates of surface water depletion from pumping groundwater. So this is on the cutting edge research end of the spectrum there. So we've developed new techniques to bring those two worlds together, so we can understand and estimate and predict the streamflow depletion resulting from pumping groundwater wells. There's information on ecosystems, so groundwater dependent ecosystems and other critical habitat that relies on surface water flows. And ultimately that gets enveloped in a sustainability lens that gets applied. Next slide. So I'm just going to whip through a few slides here, kind of highlighting those components. So this is what the water budget information looks like. So in this case, it's a monthly hydrograph with risk management levels for allocating water within those levels, integrating the hydrology models with the databases of existing water rights, and then sustainability thresholds based on the premise that from the unimpaired surface water flows, if you take off the ecosystem flow needs, then you have the amount that's available for people to use. And then from that amount, if you take off the existing amount that people are using, then you're left with a balance of water that's available for new uses. Next slide, please. Water rights support flexible exploration of cumulative water demand in a watershed. So on the right side of the screen here, we see broken down by purposes, total volumes of water associated with surface water, groundwater withdrawals. And then on the left-hand side, the ability to dive deeper into the details of those water rights, get information on the timing, the seniority, and access the paper that goes along with the right itself. Next slide, please. Surface water depletion, we provide two pathways into this question. So one is on a stream-based level of investigation. So if you're interested in how much stream flow in a given stream is impacted by pumping groundwater, both now and in the future, then you can enter through that pathway, or you can enter through an alternate pathway and look at an individual well. That could be a pre-existing well or a new well that's being contemplated, and see which streams that well is potentially impacting, how much and when. Next slide, please. This is what that information looks like when it's translated into a graphical form. So the dark line and the shaded area represent the unimpaired stream flow, and then those horizontal lines running across in green, yellow, and red represent the cumulative stream flow depletion that's impacting that stream in 1985, 2015, and 2045. Next slide, please. Annual water reported use gets synthesized both on a volumetric basis and an annual basis to provide insight into trends in water use in a watershed. Next slide, please. And this is just a snapshot of work from the Nature Conservancy that forms the kind of the context for the groundwater dependent ecosystems across the state. So these areas get flagged as highlighted when you're looking at a specific stream to highlight the ecosystems that are dependent on the water there as well. Next slide. So this is my last slide, I think. So currently, the California Water Framework is available in a private beta in the Santa Rosa Plain. We're seeking partners for new areas. The technology that drives the California Water Framework also supports the operation of these kind of tools across about 1.5 million square kilometers up in Canada. Have demonstration applications I can share up there. Next slide, please. And that's it. My contact information is down there at the bottom. I'm out of time though, and happy to answer any questions either later or offline after the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Also for your dedication to this panel, for calling in from your truck in the rain. I think the great thing about being able to have this virtually is that people can call in, you know, and join us from all over the country. I'm on the East Coast right now. Hopefully the cicadas aren't too loud in the background. People can join us internationally, like Ben, who's in Canada. So thank you for that. I just wanted to highlight the element of automation in the California Water Framework, from the data acquisition to the model execution and the reporting with visualization, relates and takes us to our final presentation for this panel by Eric Ringelberg and Michael George. They will be sharing an approach for water diversion measurement in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. So first I'll introduce Eric and then I'll introduce Michael. Eric Ringelberg is the California director of the Freshwater Trust, a nonprofit focused on using data-driven solutions to restore and conserve freshwater ecosystems. With over 20 years of experience in applied environmental science and consulting, Eric has a wealth of knowledge in water-related environmental issues across the West, ranging from methyl mercury source control and freshwater harmful algal bloom management to directing native fish recovery programs. He's the recipient of a team award from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for deep water explosive ordnance removal, which is pretty cool. He has published articles on California's water crisis, presented on a wide range of environmental topics to various state boards and commissions. Finally, he has served on various technical advisory committees, including the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board, regional water planning commissions, and watershed councils. And Michael George was appointed to a 4-year term as Delta Water Master beginning in January 2015. He was reappointed for a second 4-year term through January of 2023. The position of Delta Water Master was created by the 2009 Delta Reform legislation. The Delta Water Master is an independent officer of the state, reporting jointly to the State Water Resources Control Board and the Delta Stewardship Council. The Water Master has statutory responsibility for administering water rights within the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta and the Suisun Marsh. Additionally, the Delta Water Master advises the board and the council on related water rights, water quality, and water operations in and affecting the Delta, which is simultaneously a critical estuarine habitat, vital agricultural area, and the hub of California's water infrastructure. And so prior to being appointed, Michael was active in Western water law and policy as a water lawyer, as the CEO of a publicly traded water resource management company, as a senior executive of an investor-owned water utility, and as an investment banker, serving both public and private entities in the water industry. He is an honors graduate of the University of Notre Dame and the Georgetown University Law Center, where he was an editor of Law and Policy and International Business. Mr. George has lectured on California water resource issues at UC San Diego, USC, and UC Berkeley. He is a member of the California Bar. So thank you for joining us, Eric and Michael. I'll pass it off to you both, but I just want to say go Irish, because Michael went to Notre Dame.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And, you know, you raised a couple of the integrated points, but I wanted to dive into that a little bit further before I go deeper into the presentation, which is Mark's point to the user decision maker, and in our particular case, the leadership of the users and decision makers in our process is critical. That's the only reason why we're successful with this. The technology, pretty much anyone can do. It's how you get that technology to actually work in an applied circumstance really requires a lot of communication, and in particular leadership from the decision makers. And then we talked earlier about the data, static data, you know, that's the bugaboo for everyone in this group. Low quality data is something we struggled with. Data standards are one of the ways, one of the tools that we use to resolve those, but really focusing on QA, QC and trying to automate the QA, QC of those data, applying remote sensing to scale, and then ultimately, as we heard about just recently, the APIs in terms of being able to make this successful, being able to use the tools that we heard about earlier to be resistant to the breaking of links, to be resistant to the changing of methodological approaches. It's absolutely critical for the long-term success. So let me quick give you a tour from the law to the systems that we applied to resolve those legal questions, and then to the next steps. So next slide, please. Thank you. So SB 88 is pretty arcane. It's a law that required metering if you're over 10 acre-feet of diversion for surface water diversions. And there's a whole bunch of other criteria and tiers. But what we wanted to do, the challenge here is that the delta is below sea level in many cases. They don't actually have power in many of the locations that they have their diversions because it's below sea level, remote, behind a riparian corridor, behind a levee. It's actually really difficult to use a lot of the similar sort of technologies that we'd expect and are applied throughout the state of California. It was previously exempted before SB 88 came on board. And so we had to overcome those challenges to be able to have people meet their annual reporting requirements. Next slide. So the Water Master, who's provided the leadership, and he'll speak at the end of the presentation, was the one who actually helped kick us off. We came to him, we being a consortium of interested parties, several large water districts, Central and South Water districts, Metropolitan Water Agency, and a host of other folks, including the Nature Conservancy, all have diversions in the Delta. And so we're unique in our support in that we're helping individual producers, farmers, meet their reporting requirements. Most of the other groups have large agencies. And we did that to fill the gap where the average diverter doesn't have the technical capability of being able to meet the legal requirements. We'll talk more about that in just a second. So we're in year 3 of the program. We're trying to validate what's called an alternative compliance method, or alternative compliance plan technically, which allows us to demonstrate that there aren't other ready solutions that can help meet the law, but at the same time provide some pretty, I think, important lessons learned and tools for systematizing the collection of data, and then hopefully improving the application of those data for water management. The next slide, please. So these are our participants. We have 162 licenses and statements, 65 water rights holders. The landowner is the person who has the water rights obligation to report, but they're often not even connected to the farm. It may be a leasee, a team of lessees, a large corporation, and there's a lot of data gaps in that process. So the person who's ultimately responsible to meet the legal requirements is not the person who necessarily has the information, and the person who has the information might be buried behind 2 or 3 layers of organizational infrastructure and people. So we took a look at this opportunity and said, well, how would we systemize this approach? So we recruited in the North Delta. We have a few in the South Delta. We sat down with the individual diverters and we said, hey, provide us the information about how you're operating your diversion, and let's see what we can do from there. Next slide, please. So we got all that information. We did it manually. And we'll talk about why that's not the most efficient means in the world. But we wanted to be able to be approachable and have those individuals meet us, we would meet them where they're at. And so we started off with participant supplied data, remotely available data, and then we're actually jumping forward. Next slide. So this is our system. I won't dig into it. It's pretty standard. The trust uses what we call the Basin Scout approach. We use remote sense data. We mash it up through a variety of different systems. We've now switched to an app. So instead of having people fill out paper forms, we do it all through an app. And then ultimately there's a tracking tool. What's missing from this is a reporting tool, and that's getting the data up into eRIMS. Next slide, please. So how do we do it? Standard method. We actually now use machine learning for field delineation. So that's all automated now with a QA QC step. We have a whole bunch of additional data. We talk with the individual producers to verify now. We're year 3, so we have a pretty good sense of what's going on at the operational level. We use CIMAS for our reference ET data. We use a consumptive, the Department of Water Resources consumptive use program as our primary tool for establishing the water demands. And then we run all these in R. The crux of this is the one I just passed over, which is how do you link that diversion to the place of use, which can be quite a distance in the Delta, and how do you then be able to make sure that you can apply this using remote sensing tools? That's our primary struggle moving forward. Is it's easy enough when you have the reporter tell you where the fields, where the water is being applied in the fields. It's very difficult to be able to tell in this mosaic where the water's coming from. It's flat as a pancake out there, and people use a sheet of plastic to create the hydraulic head to move the water around. So the water moves multidimensionally depending on the operator, depending on the time of day, depending on the time of year. It's a really complex thing to model, and we are struggling to move that into the next generation. Next slide, please. So this is just one example of the database structure, just for the data nerds out there. Just getting the field type association, getting the legal rights deconstructed from the type of right into the place of use, into the timing, into the restrictions of the individual rights. Has been quite complex. We've had to set up a couple of different database structures. Next slide, please. And then just really simply, the database structure is just one tiny piece of the puzzle. How do you get the information into it? How do you get the information out? How do you do QC in that? That's our day-to-day with this program. Next slide, please. And now we're moving on to the more efficient approach, which is how do you reduce the amount of contacts with the landowner, get more efficient with communication with the grower? How do you get better data sources? How do you continuously refine and systematize the approach? So we have now fully automated the Department of Water Resources consumptive use program. We've automated the field collection. We're down to the point where we can tell when people are watering their alfalfa fields. Still, as I said, because of some of the physical geometry issues, we still need some help figuring out where it's actually being used and which particular field is getting watered. But we're getting pretty close now. And so one of the opportunities I think folks heard about OpenET, EDF has been a huge supporter of this, and OpenET is being proposed for use in the Delta. And so what we're looking at right now is, can we use OpenET, replace the consumptive water use analysis that we're using now, systematize it, and then ultimately have essentially a report for every field aggregated by every water right, aggregated by APN, and automated reporting directly to the Department of Water Resources through the, either the ERIM system or advanced future version of the ERIM system. Next slide, please. And then this is just a quick little illustration of kind of what that complexity looks like. We're using machine learning, a variety of different kinds of neural networks to be able to save that step so that the diverter literally just has to tell us that our assumptions are correct or not correct in an automated manner now, and then we can refine our tools. And so we're actually using that engagement with the producer to improve the automation of that network. Next slide. And that's it. I'll kick it back to Lindsay. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric. I enjoyed seeing OpenET on one of your slides, because earlier this afternoon we had heard from Robin Grimm with EDF, who presented on OpenET. So it's great to see just how everyone's work today is really interconnected. And so I think that's it for the presentation. So I'd like to leave our last 5 to 10 minutes or so for question and answers. I encourage the audience to use the question and answer icon at the bottom. But I'll kick it off. So I guess I'll open this question to all 5 of the panelists. So what potential benefits from this realm of your work are you most excited about in the coming year?
So I'll start on that. What I'm most excited about is stepping back from what Eric just described in terms of water use measurement in the Delta, which is really complex, it's really contentious, and relying on individuals to report their water use on a delayed basis, measuring it many different ways, estimating it different ways, as Eric says, being removed from the data. The benefit that I'm looking for is to systematize the collection of the information, to do it on a consistent basis, to have it available on a timely basis rather than a delayed basis, and then take all that information that's lower cost, faster, more timely, less invasive, and turn it back to that individual who knows the land the best, knows what the crops are, knows what kind of a month in terms of weather and so forth, and to get that on the ground verification or validation of the information as compared to the current system where we ask the individual to report that information. Now we're asking him or her or it to crowd correct the information that they know best, but that is available in a credible, consistent, timely basis. That's a huge change in the Delta in terms of understanding how water is actually used and getting behind a lot of the myths and positions and arguments that we've had because we haven't had timely, available, consistent data. And the time that this really matters is in times of shortage. When there's lots of water in the system, it doesn't matter so much what happens in the Delta. But when we come to shortage, when we come to controversy, when we come to contention, having that accurate information that has been developed on a consistent basis and then reviewed by the individuals at a granular level and verified can have an enormous impact on managing in that crisis situation. So that's what I'm most looking forward to.
Thank you, Michael. Any of the other 3 panelists want to answer what are you most looking forward to in your work in the coming year?
Sure, I have a quick thought there. I mean, I think as the event opened this morning and there was the discussion about the Water Data Consortium, I'm really excited this year. There seems to be a real critical mass, and with the consortium, kind of an outside third party that's, you know, neither agency or consulting, kind of, you know, private sector side that'll help, I think, push some of the difficult people and sort of workflow challenges we've been facing, not just about getting broader adoption of the types of approaches you've heard a lot about on this panel and then other panels today. I think that's been really, there's been growing awareness and understanding of the value. I'm really excited that this year there's like an actual new entity that's going to help sort of shape that and push that and probably make things go faster. To me, that sounds really exciting.
Yeah, I don't know about the next year. I feel like that's maybe a bit too short a timeline to have any grand visions of this beautiful future that we're looking at. But I'm most excited about when we can get together and not have these conversations about data anymore, but have conversations about actually values around the management of water, and like when the conference is about, we've achieved sustainability, here's all these great successes that we've done to actually make that happen. So that's what keeps me getting out of bed every morning and working on these things.
Thanks. Go ahead, Lauren. Were you going to answer?
Yeah, I'm excited about that too. In terms of GeoConnects, we're hoping in the next 12 to 18 months that it is working and you can do a simple search in your browser and it'll pull quality, quantity, use data. And as a data user, I'm really excited about that because I'm also a data hoarder, because I'll find data and I'll go back a couple of days later and it'll be gone. So I'm excited about GeoConnects making it easier to find data.
I'm also a data hoarder. I'd never heard that term before, but I'm definitely going to use it. So I guess going from that on the flip side of things, and maybe I should have started with this question so we could have ended on the high note of things we're looking forward to, but what sorts of barriers do you all face in applying open water data approaches to your work? What challenges worry you the most, and how can you guard against them to ensure success? And I think some of your presentations already address this, but yeah, if you could just give like each of those the highlights to that answer.
I'll go. I think in terms of challenges, the understanding the landscape of water rights is a huge challenge in California. I don't know what the solution is going to be to that, because for each specific water right, there's so much history that goes along with it. But it's really hard to understand the details of the timing and the quantity and the conditions associated with water rights. This is not a California specific problem. This is a problem everywhere. I've not seen anybody solve this effectively. But that's I think a big challenge is improving the understanding of how much water is actually allocated, and understanding how all of those rights, the thousands of rights that will exist in a watershed, how they all work together.
I can go. And Ben, you and I need to put our heads together, because I think we're much more comfortable in that space. I think the biggest issue that we run into is time. It's not even money at this point, although we could always use more money. It's time to be able to organize, move forward, reconsider, and reapply. We're always, chasing that ball.
Well, so Eric says that he and Ben ought to get their heads together because Eric's got a good sense of the water rights system. I will say, given my role as administrator of water rights in the Delta, that the water rights system in California is mind-numbingly complex, not only because of the history and the way the history has impacted water rights and how we have created a series of investment-backed expectations about water availability that in the current environment with growing demands on a finite supply that is highly variable, how we manage a system that overlaps two incompatible notions. One is priority, first in time, first in right, and the other one, which is incredibly important in the Delta, which is riparian rights. And the problem, again, as I said, is in times of shortage, how do you manage in that system? And you've got two systems that operate on different strategies for allocating shortage, or put it another way, allocating supply in times of shortage. So the priority system says first in time, first in right. The riparian system says everybody cuts back so that everybody gets a proportional share, a correlative share. And I will tell you, in the Delta, it's my experience, particularly going through the 2014-15 drought, it was impossible to manage those systems. It was like whack-a-mole. You'd you'd get to the bottom of the rabbit hole on a pre-14 right, and then a riparian right would pop up. And those are incompatible. So I'm frankly closer to where you are, Ben, even though I work much more closely with you, Eric. I think the allocation system in California is old, and it was designed for a different time and different uses. Now, I will say, however, that we are far better off making the system we've got work better, because even though we can all agree that it's a creaky old system and we ought to have a better, more purpose-built system, none of us can agree what that system should look like. So as complicated and as difficult as it is, I'm pretty much dedicated to working within the system we've got and making administration of it better. For instance, with some of the things that Eric and I have talked about, so that we have better information on a more timely basis that is crowd corrected by the people who are actually putting it to use.
And I'll say for share and open, making water data, public water data open, I think one of the key challenges is it's not so much a technology problem, as someone said earlier, it's a social cultural adjustment. And it's really hard for public agencies when they have these missions they're meeting. If you can't articulate the value proposition or the return on investment, or how spending money, not on this critical mission, but on your data infrastructure is gonna help you meet your mission better, it's really hard for them to pitch it to decision makers, right, when they already don't have enough money going around. I think the second piece of that is there's a lot of IT systems that even if you agree and you want to invest in your water data, it's really hard to get that IT online. And I think the way that, where we've seen the most changes is in California and New Mexico, because they have these state policies that are mandating open water data. So that's getting resources to agencies, public agencies for data, and it's helping IT to get behind it.
Thanks. Mark, I just want to give you a quick chance to answer.
Yeah, just one final thought. I mean, I agree with Eric that time is also a tricky component, but I do want to say, I mean, I think investment is really key here. I mean, especially this may be more the sector or the part of the sector I work in, which is kind of tragedy of the commons, sort of, you know, water resources, big scale, and fish and the other organisms that depend on those water resources. There's not really an R&D source out there. There's not really a, you know, that kind of investment. And I think in order to get the Lauren that you described, I think you really do need to bring in some people that are in high demand in other places around technology. And that does require money. And it does require kind of a changing of the way that projects get contracted, and that'll help with the speed too, so that we're not always in this time crunch of, you know, the decision needed to be made 3 months ago and we still don't have a contract to make it. So.
Well, thank you. Thanks to all the Surface Water Flows panelists. I really enjoyed your presentations, and thank you for entertaining those questions. You all made for a great session. I'm excited that a bunch of you wanted to get your heads together after the session. Hopefully more connections can be made based on everything that we've heard today on panels and showcases. And because one major point of this conference is for networking. So before we end here, I just wanted to thank the conference organizers, who I know worked tirelessly to transition this from an in-person event, how it usually happens, to a virtual event, because there's so much that goes on behind the scenes to have a successful online event. And I want to thank the California Data Collaborative, who's one of the event hosts, for inviting me to moderate. I've had the pleasure of working directly with Chris Toll and with Drew and the team since I started at Met a year ago, and it's been a really great experience. So now I'll hand it back off to, I believe, Scott and Chris, who have some final remarks before we get to everyone's favorite part, the virtual happy hour. And I encourage everyone to stay on for that so we can network with the panelists and with your colleagues. And so thank you, everyone.
Fantastic, Lindsay. Thank you very much. And panelists, absolutely fantastic panel. Ben, Lauren, Mark, Aaron, Michael, Eric, Michael, thank you so much for your time and your insights there today. So as the whole day has been, time has been tight, so we're going to kind of move on to our next session. But before we do, I have an announcement to make in terms of the winner of our Innovator Showcase. It was, again, we had, for those of you who joined us, we had 8 outstanding early stage water technology companies join us, give us a kind of super brief overview of everything they're working on in 3 minutes, which was amazing that they could do that. We were then joined by the previous panel, which consisted of our investor panel. And they were kind enough to chime in with questions for the innovators, which the innovators answered in an extremely short fashion, which again was very impressive. At the sort of culmination of it all, I basically I asked all the investors who became judges to kind of give me their top 3 pitches, and not necessarily the best company, but pitches, you know, given that the investors don't know the companies. And what I received back from the investors during this last hour were actually, I said top 3, and the #1 pick for each of the investors was a different company. So what I did is then I kind of ranked them and I gave them a number valuation for 1, 2, and 3, and to come up with a winner. So the winner of today's showcase, and only by 2 points in the overall scheme of things, was Conservation Labs. So Mark Kopchak, congratulations, great presentation. I look forward as one of your winning awards, you're going to be getting the Sustain SoCal Startup Membership for free for the year. So I'll look forward to onboarding you next week at some time of our choosing. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Christopher Tull, who has been one of the backbones of this whole event and our great partner with the California Data Collaborative, to kind of close us out. And I'm just going to quickly, Chris Tull serves as a project manager for the California Data Collaborative, where he has helped the California Data Collaborative grow from its early days as a pilot project into the respected organization as it is today. And at the happy hour, I'll just make a quick note that Chris is going to put on his mixologist hat and lead us through the chemistry of palomolytics. So before I blather on any longer, I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris. Please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I do think you might be promising a little much if I'm supposed to get into chemistry of this drink, but I will be preparing a drink that we can hopefully drink along to. I'll be brief. It's the end of the day. I know in my house it's pretty stuffy, so I'm looking for some refreshment. But I just wanted to say that I've been super impressed by all of the content that we've seen today. Honestly, I'm feeling probably every year I leave this conference feeling optimistic, but I'm already feeling, we're only halfway through, but I'm already feeling maybe more optimistic than I have at any of these past conferences, just because maybe it's us sort of succeeding at this, or in my opinion, succeeding at this transition to an online event, but also it feels like there's this bigger push towards system level sort of data solutions and addressing these problems at systemic level, whether it's the consortium really building, we heard over and over, like, get the stakeholders involved, and the consortium is really purpose built for that, to build a spot for people to come together, whether it's folks like I can't highlight everyone, I'm sorry, I'm just going to call out a few, Brent Vandenberg with Gears, this great application of building a state data system to really help with simplify reporting and the problems of these, some of these local agencies that are going to be forced to report, or local groundwater withdrawers, whether it's, all of these great innovators. I was super excited. Like, the energy level in that session was so high. I was literally on my toes when they were answering questions at the end. like, oh, what are they going to say? Oh, that was super cool. So I hope it's it's genuine how much I've been enjoying this. That said, I really am missing one of my favorite things for this event, which is seeing all of you in person. I've made this observation. I think I speak, at least when it's in person, I speak more on the 2 days of the data summit than I do in like any day in the rest of the year. Every day after the summit, I'm like physically exhausted just from talking so much. I mean, I'm a computer guy, right? I'm like programming all day. I hop on some phone calls, but the data summit, I'm just like back to back to back, talking. And I kind of miss it. It's not quite the same event virtually, but I do think we're handling this transition really well. And I just want to, before we close out, thank again the organizing team for making this possible. We have another great day of content lined up tomorrow, and so I'm really, really optimistic about that. Thank you to our sponsors again, Ratio, Aquametric, BioLargo, and Synergy, of course. All of you, great, and thank you for making this, and all the silver sponsors, all of our bronze and other sponsors, our platinum sponsors, of course, Molten Miguel, Metropolitan. We have your names up there. Thank you. I'm so glad that you guys have such a strong presence here, because you're really making this event what it is today. And with that, we're going to exit to the happy hour. The happy hour is at 4:30, so we have a 20-minute break. It is in a different meeting. So don't stay around in this meeting. There's a separate one if you want to. If you're done for the day, thanks for coming. I hope to see you tomorrow. If you're joining the happy hour, you should have gotten an email link with the link to that happy hour. If you don't, we're going to be sharing it in the Slack. So please, or in the chat, probably in the Slack and in the chat for the Zoom. So look for that link. I'll see you there. I'll be making our Palomalytics, our specialty cocktail. You should have the instructions for that. Maybe hopefully some of you have the ingredients. You can follow along. And we'll also be doing a trivia competition. Who has the most water and data knowledge to win the grand prize. And then we'll chat and we'll hang out. So thanks again, and I hope to see you all later today and tomorrow.